You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, thank you guys so much for joining us. Hey, if you're a fan of this show and you listen to it often, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review the show. Only takes a few seconds. The more subscribers and reviews that the show gets, the more visibility we get, and that helps us grow the show and continue to bring interesting guests with incredible stories virtually from all around the world. And the reviews, they don't have to be lengthy. It can be as short as one word if you want. Just give us a rating. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. That feedback is super important to us and only helps us get better with what we're trying to do here at Hazard Ground. It's our own little community, and we really want to grow that. And the listeners and supporters, you guys are just such a huge part of what we do. So we want you guys to be as involved as possible with the whole thing. And eventually, we'd like to take the show to a point where we can travel our guests and bring us in studio and get rid of the call-in format. Just sounds a lot better. So the impact of the story and the interaction with our guests, which is where we're going, we want to be able to have guest interaction during the show, is going to make everything so much better. Again, so subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us. Give us a like on social media. Help spread the word about the Hazard Ground Podcast. Our website coming live very, very soon. We're excited about that. And you'll be able to stream episodes directly from there and donate to the podcast if you'd like. All goes towards making the show a lot better for our guests and for you and for everybody involved. Joining us now on the Hazard Ground Podcast, well, simply put, she's just one kick-ass woman. Easiest way to describe her, she is a retired Marine sergeant. She is also an amputee and also a mountain climber, snowboarder, and hopeful Olympian coming up in 2018. She is Kirstie Ennis, and she joins us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Kirstie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I would be remiss if I also didn't mention here at the top of the show that you were also the first vet to grace the cover of ESPN, the magazine. So congratulations. Cool tattoos, I'll say that much.
Thank you.
I do want to get into the ESPN, the magazine issue, but let's start all the way back at the beginning and your career as a Marine. How did you get started in the Marine Corps?
Well, I was raised by two Marine parents. So, I grew up just kind of watching and admiring them. I was extremely proud of them my whole life. And ultimately, I wanted to turn around and give them a reason to be proud of me. I graduated high school early and actually had my 2-year degree from college by the age of 17 and decided that I was going to go home and ask my parents to sign a waiver so that I could go on and join the Marine Corps. My mom was all about it. I was pretty much a hellion as a kid. And she was quick to sign the papers, but my dad, on the other hand, wasn't super keen on the idea, and I lied through my teeth to him to get him to sign the papers, telling him that I'd do a desk job. And of course, the day that I go to boot camp, my recruiter lets it slip that I wasn't in fact going to be doing a desk job, that I would actually be on the helicopters, being a mechanic and a helicopter door gunner. So I did. My first duty station was out in Miramar, and then my second one was in Kaneohe Bay, and I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan. And unfortunately, on my last deployment, didn't quite make it back home in one piece.
Well, okay, there's a lot to cover there. So before we get to what happened on your second deployment, go back to talking to your parents about it. I mean, had either of your parents experienced combat? What was the reason your dad was so against it?
Actually, that's a pretty good story. So my mom and my dad got married when they were 18 years old. And, my dad joins the Marine Corps right off the bat. A couple years down the road, I'm born, and we're all living out on 29 Palms. Well, my mom, fast forward at 27 years old, comes home one day and says, I think these female Marines are pretty badass. And my dad looked at my mom and said, I will never be married to a female Marine. and she looked at him and she said, oh yeah, watch this. So she turned around and went and got an age waiver and joined the Marine Corps.
Wow.
So of course, the first thing my dad says when I'm only 17 years old, basically a kid, my daughter's never going to be a female Marine. And I said, well, you can sign the papers now, or you can give me 10 more months and I'm going to be 18 and I'm going to go anyway. So I think it's definitely just one of those protective things. My dad was artillery and just served over in Desert Storm. And I think he was just, exposed to obviously an extremely male dominated Marine Corps. So he didn't want to see his girls involved in that.
Well, clearly you get your Hellion from your mom, obviously, because she had no regard whatsoever for any of your dad's feelings on the subject. But I mean, did you feel that at the time that was a real thing? I don't want to call it sexist because it's still your father and he's worried about your well-being. Doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl. So I get that part as a parent. But did you feel like, honestly, if you were a boy, he would have had less objection to you going in the Marines?
Mm, it's an interesting dynamic. I would, the relationship that I think a father and a daughter have is very special, and I think it's an innate thing that men want to protect women. Since the beginning of time, if you will. It's been in any book that you read, it's the men protecting the women and the men being providers. So I think that's more so what it was. But even after I joined the Marine Corps, one of the biggest struggles that I faced was the person standing on the gun behind me was looking at me more so as their wife, their daughter, their girlfriends, their, whatever females they had in their life. That was their first thought was, well, I don't want, Sergeant Ennis on the gun at this time because, he's seeing, like I said, like his daughter or his wife, not seeing me as a Marine. So I think there's a lot more in depth. I think there's a lot more just like, I don't know if it's the right way to put it, but like natural things there, not necessarily being sexist.
No, I think that's fair. It's a hard thing. You have to mentally break it, especially as a leader. And even if it's down at the squad level, you have to make a conscious decision to not put the fact that there's a female there and it's just a soldier or it's just a Marine or it's just an airman and treat them the exact same way because over 18 years in the Army, all I've ever heard from them is just treat us like everybody else. Just we're the same as you. It doesn't have to be different. And you really have to make a conscious thought process to be able to do that. So I get how it's tough, but I have yet to put a female in a position and watch her fail because she's a female, if that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay, so you said you ended up being a helicopter mechanic and you ended up being a gunner. Now, your dad wanted you to do a desk job, but was there something particular about that job that you chose, or was it just because it was anything other than a desk job?
No, I wanted something that was really going to shake the system and kind of give me a run for my money. Growing up, I had everything was, just such a breeze. Like school, I was very mischievous because school was so easy for me. I could read something and I knew it. And I wanted something that I wasn't super familiar with. Like obviously working with my hands, being a mechanic, whole world that, no one had really introduced me to. So I was looking for something different. And then, I don't want to say that I wanted a combat job because that's not necessarily, what I went in like with the mentality of. It was more so I wanted a job that would have me super hands-on and give me something that, that I had to have thick skin, have a chip on my shoulder and go out and not for me to sound sexist now, but, go out and show the guys that I could do their jobs, if you will, better or be faster or be stronger. So it was more so just kind of a challenge to myself.
No, I mean, I understand. That makes a lot of sense to me. But the other thing, too, is that you signed up in a post 9/11 era. So when you say you didn't want a combat job, you're in the Marines. Combat's kind of inevitable, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but I mean, I'm not the woman that's going to go and try to be infantry. If that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Absolutely, I want to go and be the 5'4", 115-pound woman that's standing behind a 50 caliber machine gun, lighting up the night sky. But at the same time, like I don't think that there's a spot for me, to be kicking down, doors with the squad of guys. That's just my perspective on it. But so when I say that, it was like, there's these jobs that are extremely close to combat, like combat engineer, or, like I said, being a door gunner. And that's what I was drawn to. I wasn't going to be the one to try and seek out being an artillery or seek out being an infantry by any means.
Okay, so you finish basic and you're off to your first duty assignment. What is your basic responsibilities and kind of where are you? Give me the time frame. Give me some background here.
So I went to Paris Island and graduated with Papa Company in 2008. And obviously my MOS schools kind of required a lengthy time frame. So I did my first school actually in Pensacola, Florida, and did my second school in New River, North Carolina, and hit the fleet in 2009. And then I was attached to HMH 465 and 461 out of Miramar, and did a deployment January 2011 to August 2011. And kind of a crazy story. I came home for about 2 weeks of leave and had about 3 months, went to Hawaii and deployed right off the bat again in January 2012, up until the point that I got hurt in June 2012.
So what was your first deployment like? I mean, what were you thinking going into it? What were you told? Did you have any reservations?
Thought process was I wasn't worried. It was more so I really was looking forward to the simplicity of it. It's a situation where it's like you're not worrying about where you're gonna get your dinner from. You're not worried about what you're gonna wear, how your hair is gonna look. It's in certain situations, kill or be killed. Like, it's very simple. And going into it, there was never a moment where I was questioning my purpose, which is a pretty significant feeling. And quite frankly, it's one of the feelings that I totally lost after I got hurt, just that sense of purpose. I think one of the things that I was a little hesitant towards is just the unknown, though. My first deployment was with a bunch of guys that I've never deployed before, so it wasn't like I could turn around and start picking brains as a lance corporal and corporal. It was a lot of, like I said, just proving myself and showing that I could do my job, overseas just as good as I could do it over in garrison.
On that first deployment, did you see enemy contact?
No.
Really? Okay.
Everything that we had been involved with was relatively from afar. I would never say it was a situation where I felt super threatened. Even when we were flying over there, at times it was, you're going all over the place. But there was never a moment where I was, truly in fear. You saw a lot, but it wasn't a situation where I was, worried about life or death. That all came on the second deployment.
Yeah. I was in Iraq in all of 2011, so I was in the other war, so to speak, while you were in Afghanistan. And I just remember, you didn't hear a lot about the violence there at that point in time. You didn't hear a lot about it. I mean, obviously we all know what was going on, but you just didn't hear much. What was the operational tempo like day in and day out there for your first deployment?
It was honestly still pretty heavy. Obviously being air crew, or even just being a squadron as a whole, your whole job is to support the guys on the ground. That's your only mission. That's your only focus. So, of course, at that time we were doing a lot more, I would say, drug raids than really doing insertions and extractions. Mm-hmm. But it was still relatively fast paced. Like I said, it was more humanitarian type things, more, taxi drops, stuff like that, supply, combat resupplies and stuff like that. Vice actually going out and doing a lot of rips, or doing the medevacs, or doing trap standbys. That all came later, really.
I'm going to ask kind of a loaded question as we talk a little bit about the sexist stuff in the military, because I've asked this of other females on the podcast, and I'm always curious to get perspective, because I think it's different as men are wired differently. All that explanation leads to when you were over there and kind of looking at what was going on and taking a 30,000 foot view of what the mission was and what was going on there. Are you the type of person that really felt like we were making an impact or wanted to make an impact? Did you feel a void if you weren't making an impact? Or are you more the kind of the person who just looks at it and goes, hey, I have a job to do and that's all I'm focused on, and I don't really worry about the rest of it?
Honestly, I was focused on my job. When I went over there, I wasn't super concerned about if we were building wells or schools or, whatever was actually going on in the grand scheme of things. I was focused on my job. I protect my helicopter. I protect the men and women that get on my helicopter. And, I make sure we get home safe. And that's what I really worried about. That's what I stayed fixated on. And I think if, being the eyes and the ears for the pilots, and ultimately, having to maintain safety, I think that if I was worried about other things like the humanitarian efforts or what have you, that everything would get kind of diluted. I would totally be distracted about what I was actually there to be doing.
No, and that's fair. And kind of some more background. I just remember on my first deployment, when we would go out and hand supplies to school children, and you'd go visit hospitals and things of that nature. And when you interact with the populace, you can't help but kind of get attached to it and get attached to the situation and look at it and go, some of this feels hopeless. Some of it feels like we're never going to win. Some of it, oh my God, we're actually doing something good and something positive. And while you can't allow those emotions to affect how you behave and what you're trained to do, I always ask people about, how they felt about the job and the mission and everything that they were doing, as opposed to taking a robotic stance and just saying, look, I'll do the job and that's it. And whatever's next is, some people are wired like that. I'm personally not, Kirstie. I'm a little bit more emotional in that sense, but I was just curious on kind of how your thoughts were.
Well, I guess when it's sorted like that, I'll be totally honest. I don't have a soft spot for a lot of the guys over there. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. But when it came down to working with the women, or having to evacuate children that had been injured, or even having to do hero flights where we're pulling out bodies of American soldiers or, of our allies, that definitely pulls on your heartstrings, and definitely gives you more of an emotional connection. And not even kind of, but certainly reinforced why I was there. Like, it wasn't hard for me to justify why I was there or why I was doing my job by any means. And like you said, whether you're handing out water or you are building a school, you are making a difference to those people over there.
How much contact did you have with your parents while you were gone?
Yeah, actually, I probably wrote him a letter every week or two, but my dad, he was a rock star while I was on my deployments. He, obviously with him going overseas and having a feel for what the guys would like, he'd always send me care packages of cartons of smokes and, logs of tobacco and all sorts of stuff. So every time, we'd get a new group of guys going out, I'd always make sure and have him stuff. And he was really good about taking care of me and my unit. So my mom had a little bit more of a disconnect with it. She obviously worried a little more, and she wasn't exposed to deployments. So I don't think she quite understood how everything was going on.
Well, a couple of things there. One, letters. We have internet in 2011, Kirstie. You didn't bother to call home or Skype or anything? It's not 1984 anymore.
No, out on the airfield out in Bastion, everything was pretty disconnected.
Gotcha,
Don't get me wrong. If I was on Leatherneck and had the USO right there, I would definitely call home.
I was like, writing letters. I know we had internet there, but and the logs of dip, was that for you or just for your fellow Marines?
That was definitely for the fellow Marines.
Oh, okay. Listen, hey, there's nothing wrong with a girl who packs a tight one. Like, I'm okay with it. It's
They did convince me once to do it, and I instantly regretted it. And
did you throw up?
The side of my helicopter was painted.
That's fantastic. Listen, I appreciate the effort. I've quit, but every now and then the Army pulls me back in. But that's incredible. I'm glad that you did it. You had the experience. You got a great story out of it. Never to do it again. You'll tell your kids or whoever else later on, hey, stay away from this stuff. It'll kill you from the inside out. Okay. So you finish up your first deployment, and you had a 2 weeks of leave, you said, and then you get transferred from Miramar, and then you go from there over to Hawaii.
Yep.
Okay. So once you get to Hawaii, did you know you were going to deploy again immediately, or what was kind of the train up? What was the situation?
Yeah, actually, so about 3 or 4 months into my first deployment, my old gunnery sergeant who didn't deploy with us actually repeatedly wrote me a couple emails and asked if I would consider redeploying in a few short months. And at first I was like, get bent, not coming back here. But he kind of chipped away at me, and I agreed. That's when I did the whole process, did the whole dance. In the grand scheme of things, I'm glad that I had a very short turnover. It definitely didn't break my stride by any means, and didn't let me get into too much of a normal routine before I left again.
Did your parents know that was a decision happened, or did you just tell them, hey, this is what the Marines need, and that's what I'm doing?
Yeah, just told them the latter. They didn't need to know all of it.
They didn't need to know all the ins and outs. Just know what the result is, and they understood. So, okay. So you short train up, you get right back. You have generally the same mission, right? Because you're a helicopter mechanic and a gunner. So from that standpoint, it's not changing. But was anything different about the second deployment location? Anything about it?
No. I will say that home base for us was on Bastion, and then we flew everywhere from Dwyer throughout Sangin, Nowzad, Kayla, all the different areas. But this one was was quite different for me just because I was flying a lot more days when I was really used to flying nights. It was honestly just kind of a different, um, like you said earlier, a different tempo. I feel like things were much more fast paced. I was flying more. I mean, every other day I was going out, and it was always something different. You know,
Now,
I had seen more bodies and more interaction with people and more prisoners, and I just was exposed to so much more.
yeah, and it's interesting because after you're flying at night and you have, look, you know your enemy, right? The Afghans don't have night vision goggles. The Taliban doesn't have the ability to do at night what they do during the day. So clearly the risk level amps up when you go during the day. Was that something when you found out you were flying more during the day that automatically kind of put your antenna up a little bit higher?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're just, especially being in such a big aircraft, and of course, typically you're flying in sections of two or three, and you're kind of just like a sitting duck.
Yeah.
You're big, you're loud, you're there, and it's just super evident where you're going. Um, so yeah, you just there's a lot more engagement when you're flying during the day.
And what aircraft is this again?
The 53.
Okay. So when you're flying more during the day, and you're seeing more things happen, did you get in contact before the day you got injured?
So the day that I got injured was really weird. I'll just go ahead and put it that way. Earlier in that deployment, we were banned from using GoPros and the likes of that nature on the flight line because one of my staff sergeants actually got shot and he had the GoPro on his shoulder. And so the day that I got hurt, my whole flight plan changed. I was supposed to go out a little bit later in the evening, and they come in and say, "Hey, you're going outbound and you're going outbound early." So, I run out to the line and I'm going to turn up the birds. And of all people, my chief warrant officer, who made this rule of not having GoPros in the line, is filming us. And, I have pictures and video of me like 3 hours before I got hurt.
Kirstie, real quick, was the reason for no GoPros just because he was shot and it was on video, or what was the logic behind it?
Because it was shot and it was on video.
Okay.
They didn't want it
They didn't
being
want it-
leaked and
right. Okay.
sent out all over the place.
Sure, makes sense.
So it was a weird situation. I knew it was one of those things where I just knew something was going to go wrong. It was just like your stomach flips, like.
Now, that feeling, we talk about it a lot on the podcast. Because you were flying so many more missions and it was during the day, did you have that feeling on other days? I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm just curious because I remember, my first deployment, we were going outside the wire like almost every other day. And the operational tempo was so high that there were mornings I'd wake up and I'd be like, today's the day. Like, it's going to happen. Like, you have this sinking feeling in your gut that something bad's going to happen. Because how many times can you roll the dice before you crap out? How many more times can you roll the dice before it's your vehicle that gets blown up? Did you have that feeling prior to that day ever?
I had it a couple other times, but it was when I knew we were going to be, flying some pretty risky missions. And this specific mission was legitimately supposed to be a combat resupply, and then we were supposed to go extract some Marines that, for lack of better terms, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, we're getting their ship pushed in. So it was, I don't know, it was a very unique feeling when I went out there and saw him on the flight line filming me and everything else, and it wasn't right.
Is it fair to characterize it as fear?
I don't even know if I would call it fear. Like it was something. I mean, obviously, it didn't keep me from doing my job. It didn't, change anything that I was going to do. I think fear is one of those things that would alter your behavior. It was just something that I just knew something was up. And even more so, not to get super, spiritual or anything like this on you. And sorry if this derails you a little bit, but in January 2012. When I first got back out to Afghanistan, we had a helicopter go down, killed all 6 crew members. Their call sign that night was Irontail 06. Now, fast forward to June 23rd, 2012, the day that I get hurt. My aircraft is supposed to be 01. Any aircraft that has, Kirstie Ennis, it will say aircraft 01. Well, the day that I go out to turn up my aircraft, They take me off of my aircraft and put me on aircraft 06, which is a memorial helicopter for Iron Tail 06 that killed all 6 crew members. So all of the 50 cals are painted for the 6 crew members. The nose landing gear says, "We will never forget Iron Tail 06, all 6 crew members' names." And by God, what helicopter goes down gets obliterated. And in turn, the crew members and everybody else are, whether they're not dismembered, they're severely injured. I just knew something was going to go wrong that day when they took me off my aircraft and had me filming me turn up the memorial helicopter for 6 Marines that never made it home. There's just a lot of disconnects.
Yeah, I mean, it's freaky, and some people, put stock in coincidences and things of that nature. And I mean, I totally get it, and I don't think there was anything. You didn't derail anything. I certainly appreciate and understand how those things go down, because sometimes when you do things so repetitively in our line of work over there, when something is out of that normal function, it just makes you feel different. And so I get that. Like that, I think is totally understandable. It's not like going to work every day here in America where you drive and all of a sudden, oh my God, there's there's a T-shirt laying in the middle of the road or something like that, and it sends up a red flag. You just kind of ignore it. But for us, when we're doing the same thing of what we're trained on repetitively over and over and over again, and something just doesn't go the way we trained it, yeah, it kind of throws your mind into a little bit of a different state. So I get that. Now, let's back up a little bit. You get into the 06 bird. What's your mission that day? Where are you going? Take me through takeoff and what's going on in the air.
So basically June 23rd, 2012, we go outbound, literally dropping off supplies, come back to refuel. We pick up tri-walls of supplies, ammo, all that good stuff. And then we actually pick up 3 Space Age Army medics. We go outbound and we're going out to forward operating base in Alzad. And then from there, we were supposed to go outbound and do an extraction. Unfortunately, we never even made it to Nowzad. The last things that I remember are, you see these big spotlights. Of course, that's where the guys on the ground, the enemy on the ground, is basically signaling where we are, so the next guys can see us. Because at this point, it's later on in the night or later on at dusk. And the last thing I remember is the nose of the aircraft going down, the gunners in the back calling for power. The nose of the aircraft never comes back up. And then at the last split second, I guess the pilot pulled up on the collective stick and we shot straight up, rolled left. And with me being on left gun, I just sat there and I watched the ground.
Wow.
I just counted down.
So you don't remember being hit at all?
No.
So you had no idea what caused the helicopter to be in that situation?
No, when I woke up to, of course, everybody screaming and just kind of pure chaos. 2-5 actually came out from Nowzad and provided security. When I woke up, I was really fortunate to have one of the Space Age Army medics basically just in my face, kind of keeping me out of shock. And I just remember looking at his patch that said O positive, and my left leg was obviously destroyed. My arms were mangled. My cervical spine was fractured at my C2, C3, and C4, lumbar spine. And then,
so basically you landed under the helicopter.
Just about. Well, landed with my face in the dirt.
Okay.
But one of the biggest injuries that I really had to deal with was, we're not really sure what hit my face or what came through my face rather. But I actually had a hole the size of my fist on the lower right side of my face that took out my whole jaw, took out my teeth, fractured my orbital socket, and then in turn, obviously, destroyed a good chunk of my brain, my right frontal lobe. So yeah, there's everything's a big blur from the helicopter crash. The moment that I woke up, and I just remember staring at a little blue light, and one of the other gunners from the bird that evacuated me just came over and said, "Don't close your eyes because you're not going to open them again." And I just laid there and tasted the grit from my teeth and of my jaw and just kind of gurgle on blood and let it drain through the side of my face.
Oh, wow. Are you thinking, am I alive? Am I dead? Does your brain like actually functioning to be able to do that at this point?
You know, all I was thinking, I was so numb that I was almost okay. If I was going to die at that point, I was almost okay with it. The only thing that kept my wheels kind of turning was I was like, I'm not going to die without saying bye to my sister. Like, God dang it! If there's one thing that's going to happen, I'm going to say bye to my sister. And yeah, I mean, I was numb. There's no other way to explain it. I didn't even really feel the pain. I just knew something was wrong.
Do you remember anything anybody said to you other than the eye thing? Don't close your eyes. Was there anybody holding your hand? Anything of that stand out?
Actually, this part made me cry. But actually, my tail gunner that night, I'm not really sure what his thought process was, but in the back of the aircraft, all of the Space State Army medics sat on one side of the aircraft. So the other side, the last 3 seats, were open. So my tail gunner tried coming off of his gunner's belt to get to his seat, and unfortunately went out the back. Just didn't quite get there. And I don't know what happened between the moment that he got thrown out and obviously the moment that I was pretty severely injured. But he was laid next to me in the back of the helicopter, and of course I have a bunch of open wounds, and he's pretty severely injured himself. But he threw his arm over my face so that none of the hydraulic fluid that obviously leaks from these huge helicopters would get in all my wounds, and that's one of the most significant things. And then after I got to Camp Bastion, like I said, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't really feeling much, but my sergeant major and my gunny, the one who asked me to go on that deployment, walked into my tent and just cried. And in that moment, I just knew it was over. I knew I was going to go home.
Did you think you weren't going to live?
On initial impact, and when I was laying in the back of the helicopter, I didn't think I was going to live.
Can you explain that? I mean, we talk so much on the podcast about coming to grips with your own mortality. But at that moment, that's not coming to grips with your own mortality. That is, looking past mortality into the next life. I mean, what's that like?
As much as my brain wasn't functioning, the only things I kept thinking about is basically what my legacy was going to be, and hopefully that somebody would carry this forward and be there for my guys and finish the mission. But like I said, otherwise I was okay. I mean, that sounds really bizarre, but I almost didn't care.
No, that's understandable.
It was just one of those situations where I think because I'm a very kind of just short, if you will, I was numb to it. I was okay with my mortality and figured, I came out here to do my job. I did my job to the best of my abilities, and I knew this was a possibility.
Kirstie, you mentioned your sister. No mention of your parents. Did you not think about them? Did you kind of assume they were going to understand?
I think so. There's a big gap between my sister and I, and I've always had a weird guilt about not being a good big sister because I left home at such a young age.
Right.
That I was never there for her. Whether it was like having a tough time in middle school or just the whole evolution of growing up. And I think what clicked in my head was, now you're really not going to be able to be there for her. So the least you can do is say goodbye.
Wow. It's just, I just want to give you a hug. Like, there's so many times it happens on this podcast, but the rawness of the emotion, and I trust me, I hold it in the highest regard, and I certainly respect it. And thank you so much for being so candid and sharing it with us. But that's That's just the rawness of combat sometimes, and it happens. I mean, it doesn't pick and choose any one of us on purpose. It just kind of just goes that way, and how everybody deals with it and how everybody responds to it in their own way is a very personal thing. But it's also something a lot of people, when they share it, it makes us more relatable and makes others understand kind of what combat is all about. And repeatedly, I'd be not doing my job if I didn't mention the fact that you, like every other Marine and every other soldier, always says, I just was thinking about my guys, and I can't underscore that enough, because it's just such a big part of why we do what we do, right? I mean, it's about the person next to us. It's nothing else.
Absolutely. Well, I think that was the hardest part for me. I was recently, before I got hurt, I was combat meritoriously promoted to sergeant, and I, they never did they never pinned me because there was so much going on. Well, of course, after I'm hurt and everything else, I'm back at Naval Medical Center San Diego, and the CG of 2nd Mall flies out to do my award ceremony and pin me and all these different things. And they had like 15 of my guys from my unit almost on like a satellite conference call so that my guys could be there. And I just cried. I should have been, happy and everything else, but I was so deflated and just defeated because I was looking at the guys that I left behind over there. And all I wanted to do was be there with them. And I was just destroyed that, I felt like I let them down. I had no control over the situation, but it was just like I felt like I owed them something.
Certainly understand it. What's the last thing you remember before you get medevaced out, and what's the first thing you remember when you wake up? And I assume that you're at Bethesda or Fort Sam Houston or wherever, right?
Yeah. Well, so I was transported from Camp Bastion to Kandahar and then to Germany. In Germany, I was there for a little bit, and that's actually the first time that, I came to, and, they had done some of my surgeries at this point. Well, this is the first time I get to call home to my mom. And my CO did a very terrible job of explaining to my mother what all happened. He mentioned my leg. And so she has no idea. Well, so I'm trying to talk to her and, tell her I'm coming home. And she starts laughing. She's like, Kirstie, baby, I have no idea what you're saying. You must be on some good medicine. And I said, F you, and I hung up the phone. Like, she had no idea I didn't have a jaw. She had no idea I didn't have teeth or anything. So that was the last thing I remember before actually coming back stateside. When I got back stateside and was a little more coherent, I was at Walter Reed for a little while, and they sent me to Naval Medical Center San Diego, Balboa.
Okay.
And that was the first time that I actually got to see my mom, my dad, and my sister. And it was a pretty crazy thing because, of course, my family's crying and everything else. My dad looks at me and he says, this is the happiest day of my life. I got my kid home alive from the war. And then he whips around at me and he looks at me and he says, I told you this shit would happen. That's why I wanted you to do a desk job.
That is fantastic. And you know what the funny, I assume you understood totally and did nothing but roll your eyes and smile as best you could.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Marine talking to a Marine.
At that point, it's just irony. You're just like, dang, he's right.
Yeah, well, father knows best, right? Okay, right. So I can't, with all your injuries that you described, I can't even begin to imagine what the rehab is like. When do you get a full grasp of how bad you are?
My first realization was when I had no memory. Had very little memory, and I had a very difficult time with word recognition and retrieval. So I couldn't tell people exactly what I was thinking or what I was feeling or what I needed. So that's where the 2 years of speech therapy and cognitive therapy and vestibular therapy came in. It wasn't the physical injuries that really beat me down. It was specifically the mental stuff. And then later on down the road, about a year into it, was more of the emotional stuff.
Right.
I had a long road. I mean, from the day of my injury, even up until 10 months ago, I just had my last amputation. I had to have 2 more inches of my femur taken off.
Oh, wow.
So it's it's an ongoing uphill battle at this point.
Let me ask you. I kind of skipped. I wanted to ask you something. One, with the helicopter crash, did you lose any people in the crash itself?
No, and that's what I was so earlier when I had mentioned Iron Tail 06. I, again, not to sound crazy, but I'm a firm believer that the reason my guys came home, maybe not in one piece, but the reason all of us came home were because those 6 guys were looking down on us and said history wasn't going to repeat itself. And I shit you not, my call sign the night that my helicopter crashes was Legacy 07.
Oh, wow.
So maybe I've had a lot of time to think about this stuff. Obviously, a lot of hospital time. But, you can't make stuff like that up. And
higher power. I mean, isn't it?
Yes.
Listen, war doesn't pick and choose, as I mentioned before. It treats everybody the same. And anybody who's ever been there believes that at some point in time, there's something watching over all of us. So I certainly can sympathize with that notion. Did other people in the helicopter help piece together what happened for you?
Oh, absolutely.
So what were you told? And because you recounted what you remembered, but what else did you find out that you remember?
Well, basically what I was told in the grand scheme was that there was a lot of outside stuff going on. I was told that there was, I'm going to have to be choosy with how I say this, but I was told that there was some distraction from an A&P post. And I was told that there were situations, everything from brownout to no viz, to the pilots not having control. So I've been told a handful of things.
Well, let me try to see if I can ask a question that may be able to answer this easy. Are people intimating that there was pilot error?
I hate to do that to anybody.
Sure, no, that's understandable.
There's a lot that happened that night. But if you want my version of it, that's not glorified in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to say yes.
And look, and let me caveat it by saying this to everybody who's listening. I don't necessarily say that in a pejorative way, like they were deliberately trying to do something that would injure fellow Marines in a helicopter. Pilot error sometimes is a result of the situation around them and them not choosing the right way out. I mean, that's, I'm speaking in broad terms here, Kirstie, as you can justify. I mean, not everything pilot error is 100% the pilot's fault, if that makes sense. Sometimes the wind or anything else gets in the way and they react to it the way they think they're supposed to as far as training is concerned. But then when you have time to step back and review it and you look at all the instrumentation, you look at all the results and everything else, pilot error is just something that happens much like dropping a glass of water or milk on the floor. It's not because you wanted to do it. Sometimes, for lack of a better term, you lose your grip and bad things happen. That's kind of the way I meant it. I didn't mean it as if your pilots were purposely trying to do something that obviously would injure or nearly kill many people. So
Right.
pilot error is a wide thing, but it's just the easiest way to sum it up that, look, put it this way, as you know, but pilot error is a lot more common than some of the other egregious mistakes we've seen from people who unfortunately wear the same uniform that we do. I mean, it just happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're spot on with it. I just didn't want to make it seem like I was like, oh, nope, that guy's fault.
No, listen, I haven't met a pilot who's purposely tried to crash a helicopter that they didn't have to. I mean,
yeah, it's not fun.
It's, listen, we've talked to dozens of people on this podcast who have survived a helicopter crash one way or another, and none of them have ever pointed a finger and said, well, that pilot just screwed up. I mean, I wouldn't be, I'd be fine if he knew how to fly. No one ever says that. That's not what we're trying to drive at. We're just simply stating the point that, it's hard to fly. There's a reason why there's not a lot of helicopter pilots in the world. It's a really tough job, and you make mistakes, and sometimes bad things happen. I mean, it's the nature of combat. Okay, so you when you get the whole story, do you feel better? Do you feel worse? What do you feel?
I just didn't feel much. I was I was, like I said, I was just heartbroken. I was heartbroken that I knew my time with my guys was up. I was devastated for the injuries that others sustained. Heartbroken that we never made it to where we were supposed to be. That was probably the hardest part, or hardest pill for any of us to swallow, was the fact that we had somewhere to be and guys on the ground needed us there and we never made it to them. So when all of these things started to surface and more of the explanations were told, it was one of those just gut wrenching things where it was like, you start to question what could you have done differently? Was there something I could have done to get us out there? And then of course, you wonder about the guys on the ground that you never made it to. So those are the more of the things that I was fixated on.
When does guilt set in for you? And how do you react to that? Does it send you in a downward spiral? I mean, all of this, you go through the gamut of emotions, right? When you're trying to put your life back together and physically put yourself back together. Take me through that and what things you're feeling.
Guilt set in pretty much instantaneously.
How long did it take to go away?
I don't know if it ever will, to be totally honest. It's one of those things where I wake up most mornings and can't help but wonder if, things didn't go wrong, if I'd still be in the Marine Corps, which, I wanted to do 20 years. I wanted to go back to Afghanistan. I wanted to do more deployments. So there's like that aspect of guilt. And then there's the aspect of guilt where one of the situations that I do remember flying from Germany to Walter Reed was they line all these beds up, just stretchers basically on C-130s. And I remember waking up at one point and just I couldn't turn my head because my neck was, fractured and everything else. And I just remember looking at all the bodies next to me and I couldn't. It was like a guilt of, well, now you're going home. And I know these guys with their wounds, they were on the ground. Are these some of the guys that I was supposed to go and get? Or, so there's so many different dynamics. Or even, some in another way, even, some of the guys and gals that never made it home. It's like, well, what the hell? Who survives a helicopter crash? Why did I make it home? And why didn't any of the guys of Iron Tail 06? So, I mean, there are so many avenues of guilt, especially when your injuries are fresh. Like I said, some of them now I've gotten to a point where, I've turned maybe the guilt of, being one of the guys that made it home into the thing of, what, now I'm going to live, breathe, carry forward with my life in honor of those guys and their families. But some of them, it's really difficult to turn around.
The rehab has been arduous, as you just mentioned. You just had your last surgery, and this is now, 5 years later. What was the hardest part about the rehab for you? I know you mentioned the mental stuff, but was anything physically challenging?
I've always gone back and forth about, did you make the right decisions in your recovery? In order, to get the best results in the long run. So when they first came in and told me that they were going to amputate my leg, I laughed. And I was like, in my mind, the right quarter of my brain is mush. I have no face. My back's broken. My arms are broken. There are so many injuries here. The last thing you need to do was be cutting my leg off right now.
Go ahead, take it. Can you fix the rest of this stuff while you're at it?
Yeah, well, so that was my whole thing is, how about we work on fixing all these other things and we can worry about the leg? Because obviously I'm not going to be walking and gallivanting around anytime soon anyway. So, so I prolonged, amputating the leg, which now hindsight being what it is, I kick myself in the butt all the time. And I'm like, well, hey, if you amputated, the day that you got to San Diego, where would you be now?
But you got a choice to do that? Like they were like, when do you want us to do this? That seems like something that the doctor doesn't give you a choice on.
Oh yeah. So if you come back from Afghanistan and your leg is not off and there is a way to salvage it, they give you the option.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I would have never thought that. I would have thought that something that needs to be amputated, they kind of just take it.
Nope. I did about 14 reconstructive surgeries on my leg.
Really?
And then finally let them have it. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you come to that decision?
Well, to be totally honest, it's going to sound pretty petty.
No, go for it. I love petty.
At 20, 22 years old, my mind, I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to have no leg. I'm not going to be able to wear a dress. I'm not going to be able to wear heels. Who's going to look at me differently? Am I going to be able to have a family? Like the very feminine, like superficial things popped into my head.
That's not petty at all.
Well,
that's very normal.
Well, and then even to fast forward a little bit more, I don't know any amputees, Okay. I didn't know if I'd be able to run. I didn't know if there's a lot of just questions where I was like, you know what? I need time. Before you chop this thing off, I need a second to process what you're telling me.
Right.
And unfortunately, I would have loved if my leg was totally dismembered and I woke up when it wasn't there.
Because the decision's made for you, right?
Yes, 100%.
I understand that.
Because it would have been one of those things as the nail in the coffin, it is what it is. But, being presented with this situation and being so young, I was just one of those like kind of knee-jerk reactions. And the doctors flat out told me, they're like, you're prolonging the inevitable. This leg is going to come off, whether you do it now or whether you do it. And, I was fortunate to have relatively stubborn doctors that listened to me, partially because I was insane, flying around the hospital in the wheelchair and stuff. Like
the Hellion returns.
Yes, pretty much. But, and then I look at, the other aspect of hindsight. I look at my face and you would never, I obviously have scarring, but you would never know that my teeth are fake. They have done such a fantastic job with rebuilding everything. I may not be able to smile all the way and stuff like that, but it looks like I fell down and bumped my chin. People wouldn't know that I have a fake jaw and, that I had my back broken and all these different things. So maybe because I did wait to amputate my leg, my body was able to, to work on certain other things. I try not to dwell on it too much now because obviously my leg's not growing back and scars aren't going anywhere, but, it's easy to wonder about that.
How much do you find yourself looking backward as opposed to looking forward now?
I don't. I've come to terms with pretty much everything. Don't get me wrong. I wake up some days and it sucks. Putting one foot in front of the other isn't easy and it's not painless. I wake up and I look in the mirror and it's like, oh, damn it, there's a scar there. The instant reminder of what happened. Obviously no leg. Instant reminder of everything. But it's one of those things. It's been a blessing and a curse. I wouldn't wish any of this on my worst enemy. But I look at the unique platforms that it's provided me now. Yeah, I can't serve in the military the way that I want to, but I can still continue serving the military community and continue, going forth and attempting to help the veteran population. Or, I can show the world, like you mentioned, the covers of magazines. I can go forth and show the world that regardless of the adversities you face as a man, woman, or child, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. And without these crazy things happening to me, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I try not to look back too much. I just want to look forward and figure out how I can continue serving people and hopefully inspiring, people to use a little bit more of their potential.
Okay. So you mentioned ESPN, The Body, the magazine, you were on the cover of it. What is it like getting that phone call? And tell me about that experience.
It was, I didn't seek it out. They have never featured a veteran or military service person in the magazine, period. They've never featured a mountaineer. They've never featured a rock climber. They featured just a couple amputees. So when I get this phone call and they're like, we want you to be a bunch of these first, I was totally taken aback. And at first I was like, absolutely not dragging my naked body up the side of a rock so you can take pictures. But, I stopped and I and also like there's always going to be somebody negative. There's always going to be someone there to naysay and, spin things out of control. But, I took a second and I stopped and I said, you know what? to hell with what anybody that has something negative to say. There are a lot of other people out there that can take something extremely positive and extremely beneficial from this. Whether it's, just loving yourself, loving your body, or having the confidence to go out and try new things, regardless of this quote unquote disability that you have. To me, I just, all of the good outweighed any of the bad that could ever come out of it. And strangely enough, not that they had any idea about this, on June 23rd, 2017, which is my Alive Day, my 5-year anniversary of all of this happening, is when they called me and told me that I was taking the cover out of all of these, 20 athletes that are NFL athletes, NBA, the women's hockey team, all of these just phenomenal athletes, that little Kirstie was actually going to take the cover.
Awesome.
It's pretty surreal.
Yeah, awesome. Let me ask you, did you get all the tats before the accident or after?
All before, actually.
Oh, really? Okay. So, hey, no, not hating. My wife has a whole mural down her back and on her right side. So I certainly appreciate it. And I think it looks cool. I mean, congratulations. That's just awesome. I mean, you talk about a blessing and a curse, and yeah, you could just be a regular Marine, and not that there's anything wrong with that. But you certainly have a lot more impact now and a lot more ability to, or I shouldn't say that. You have a different impact now. And a different road to go change lives as you were if you were just a regular Marine and you never got injured. So I certainly appreciate your great outlook on things. And as well, there's a good chance in 2018 you can be an Olympian. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I got into mountaineering and snowboarding alike, just off of the sheer fact that I needed something
to do
that would give me to do, yeah, that I could, just the confidence that I could go out and do whatever I wanted to do. Being originally from Florida and living in 29 Palms, California with my parents, and even in Lejeune with my parents, there aren't mountains and it's damn sure not snow. So I was literally just conjuring up some of the most extreme sports that I could possibly, get involved in, things that were completely taboo, especially for somebody with the injuries that I have.
I see the theme coming back again. You see,
yeah.
That's how you got into the Marine Corps, just picking the most hardest, difficult thing that was a little bit, taboo, so to speak. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I kind of just hit the ground running with snowboarding. I picked it up pretty quickly. Ironically, yet again, I told my doctors that I would learn how to monoski, and in turn, I get to this big event in Breckenridge, Colorado, and I decide and make the executive decision that I'm going to learn how to snowboard instead. And then even from then on, I started sneaking out of the hospital on a Thursday, and on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I would go and compete in different competitions and, train all over, Southern California and up through Mammoth and Park City and whatnot. And I've really, it was one of those things that kept me busy. The sport of snowboarding saved my life because it kept me so distracted from what was really going on at the hospital. And it was my little bit of time to be able to separate myself from the chaos of recovery to just go out, be on a mountain by myself and do something that I loved.
Was your life ever in danger? When you look back on it, like how close was it? Is it scary to think about?
Yeah. I think the human body is just so resilient that I think you could have done damn near anything, to me physically. And as long as your head and your heart's in the right place, you can overcome whatever. However, my brain was in such a terrible state that's the part that's really scary. That's the part that I didn't think that I would, come back from. And I still don't have a lot of memories, and I still have little issues. You probably wouldn't be able to tell most of them, but I'm just super thankful and relieved that I made it as far as I did with the mental stuff, because that's where I really thought I was going to lose myself.
We spend a lot of time on the podcast on PTSD and everything else that you're hinting towards, and suicide prevention and all that. If you could talk to someone who may be struggling and talk to someone about some of the things that they're feeling, what do you say to them that kind of would help pull them out of that same spot, that same dark spot that you were in?
I'm just like my father. Gave you a couple examples of my father, just tough love, and it may not work for everybody, but what I tell people is no one owes you anything. You owe it to yourself. And I struggled, especially, like I said, after that 1 year mark. I didn't want to keep fighting for myself. I wanted to throw in the towel. I was done. I didn't think that there was a future. I thought my dream was now a nightmare. And, there were so many different things going on in my life. And when my dad sat there and looked at me and said, "What the hell are you doing? Afghanistan didn't kill you. Now you want to kill yourself." This little light bulb went on. And I realized that nobody needed to spoon feed me. This was something that I needed to look internally and hold myself accountable. So that's, as not, sugar coated as it is, but you owe it to yourself. Nobody owes you a damn thing.
How is your sister? How's your relationship with her now?
Oh, God bless her. She, like I said, there's 7 years between us. So when I got hurt, she was 14. And of course, obviously, parents being Marines and everything else, I don't come from a family of money. So when I got hurt and my injuries being as severe as they were, my parents couldn't afford to come out and stay with me full time. So my little sister made the very adult decision to take herself out of public high school and do virtual online high school and sit with me while I was in the hospital. So there's that. And then even this last hospital stint, she was a junior in college and again, saw me struggling and dealing with, multiple amputations and all of this. And she took another semester off. So, but it hit her hard. Like I said, I had a lot of guilt about not being a good big sister, if you will, to her. But then, as such a young person, I couldn't imagine first of all, I couldn't imagine what it's like to have kids and be wounded. Because, I watched my little sister truly struggle with watching me struggle. And especially when I was having these times of wanting to give up, she flat out told me, she's like, if you're not here, I don't want to be here. And that was one of the hardest things I had to hear as a sister. But at the same time, I needed to hear those things. I needed to hear that from my dad. I needed to hear that from my sister. Because in the grand scheme, it's not me that was just suffering. This is my injuries affected a lot of people, all of the people around me, all the people that were, heavily involved in my life. And I think that gets overlooked. It's not just the service person. There's a lot more to it.
Well, I don't know if you want to call it irony, but, for all your want and desire to be a good big sister, I couldn't imagine your little sister was any better of a little sister for you.
Oh, she was amazing. She was definitely my rock through a lot of it. I get told that I'm strong and all these other things. And the reality of it is I don't think I'm necessarily strong. I think I pulled strength from, a lot of other people that were surrounding me. And she was definitely a big piece of that.
Final thought. Where are you now and what's your future?
Actually, working my tail off to hopefully make it to the 2018 Winter Games in South Korea. And I actually am aspiring to be the first female above the knee amputee to stand on the highest peaks of all 7 continents. So
wow.
A couple different, and I'm not really supposed to, I got some good news. The new big aspiration on top of the 7 Summits project is going to be me being the first amputee to snowboard down Mount Vincent in Antarctica, and then also being the first amputee to snowboard down Everest.
I probably need to go do something else with my life because it's nowhere near as cool as yours. I really need to step my game up. I have not done enough that even pales in comparison to the things and the aspirations that you hope for. Kirstie, Thank you so much. I don't know what else to say. Like I said, I mean, through everything that you've given us and told us, and all the emotions that you've had to go through, for you to just have such a good outlook, and for you to just have so many great things in front of you, as you said earlier perfectly, it's proof that anybody can do anything. I mean, it really is, and there's a lot of inspiration that you provide, but certainly, I know you've drawn the same inspiration from a lot of people close to you, and that's got to mean something.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Kirstie Ennis, good luck with everything. I hope to see you at the highest peaks in the world very, very soon. I hope you make the Olympics. Thank you so much for being part of the Hazard Ground podcast.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.